Well, welcome back everybody. My name's Andrew and you're watching the Kelley's Country Life. So it is actually a very chilly morning this morning. We just hit 53 degrees. It was 48 yesterday. We had a fire last night. I just stood by what's left of it right now this morning, trying to actually warm up a little. But regardless, it is perfect, and I'm in perfect working weather. So what are we gonna do today? So what we're trying to do is get up past those two black dots that you see right there. Those are actually tubes coming out for a sub panel, and one's going into the main breaker panel where we need to mount a meter box out here. So we're trying to get siding up far enough above that we can go ahead and mount those boxes on to try to really push toward getting our rough-in electrical inspection. Now we got some things to do before we can even start on siding. We're about to jump into that, and like I said, we're actually going to have to dog off and stop siding once we get a certain ways up, because then we have to do soffit. I'm doing things out of order because I'm trying to rush toward getting these rough-in inspections done, because I have appointments coming up with subcontractors like, say, spray foam and sheetrock. So we're going to be doing things a little out of order, jumping back and forth, but so goes life when you're building a house by yourself. Thanks for watching. All right, so next, before we install the siding, we need to put in any windows that are on this side of the house. And fortunately for me, there's only one window on this side. The majority of our windows start over there on the porch side. So you'll see that there is a lot of different ways how people cut the vapor barrier, how they tuck it in, and there's all different theories behind it. So I'm not saying my way is the right way, but I put a lot of time and thought and research into this, and I'm going to show you the way that I'm going to seal this up and explain why. So all we got to do is find our window opening. Once you press in, you can feel the edges of the window, and I'm going to cut out a very simple square. Probably the most common way you see people cut window and door openings is to come down the center, do a bunch of 45s, and wrap the house wrap inside and nail it, call it good. Now there is a big reason why I do not like that way. It actually allows air leakage. So say for example, if I were to cut that, lap this vapor barrier back inside like this, that vapor barrier is never actually going to seal to this wood. Even when you foam in and seal around the window, that foam expands and kind of contracts and will allow an air pocket. And basically what will happen is air can come behind that house wrap that you just put in and come to the outside. It can actually leak out. So you're not sealing your house up properly, in my mind, anytime you wrap your vapor barrier in. So everything that I'm going to install this house, I'm going to trim out the opening just like you see, and I'm going to take a little extra time to actually wrap and flash this so I'm getting a true airtight seal. So if you watched the last episode, I shim these window sills up 5 degrees, so if any water was to ever get behind the window, it'll actually not sit on the sill, it'll run out and come down this vapor barrier. So for starters, I'm going to take some of this zip flashing tape, it's really good tape, and I'm going to seal around the entire outside edge of this window. Now I have specialized corner flashing tape that I'll show you here in just a second that's stretchy, that we'll actually put down for our true moisture barrier. Right now I'm air sealing more than anything else. All right, so now that I have this tape stuck to the vapor barrier, I'm just going to pull it tight, roll it in. And zip tape actually requires that you roll and press this tape for a good bond. Now once the sun hits this afternoon, this stuff gets extremely sticky and adheres even to vapor barrier very well. Actually, I've had a lot here lately as I've been zip taping around the house. As soon as it sticks to this and you try to pull it off, it'll actually pull the fibers out of this Tyvek. It sticks to it so well. All right, so let me show you what I have here. We now have the vapor barrier itself all the way around the window, sealed to the wood. So whenever we install this window, no air can actually get behind this tape and eventually behind the vapor barrier itself, causing a huge air leak around your house. That's kind of what happens whenever you pull your vapor barrier in. Let me show you what I've done over here. Now this is just temporary. I pulled this vapor barrier in, and this is what a lot of people do. So what happens is, say you pull the vapor barrier in, you install your door or window, you put some foam behind it, it expands, it kind of does its things, it contracts. But look, you've always got a pocket with this stuff. So that foam, everybody's trusting that foam is expanding enough to push this hard enough against the wood all the way around that it's providing an airtight seal, and that's just not gonna happen. So if you actually cut this off like I showed you, tape it to where it is sealed against the wood, then put your door in and provide not only a foam seal right here, but we're going to caulk the window in on the outside. You're getting multiple ways that you're helping seal that in. Now this is also providing somewhat of a moisture barrier too, because, well, this is moisture resistant. So should any water get behind this, it's really going to wind up running down. It's not going to stay on the wood regardless and rot it. It's going to puddle up down here. But we're about to take care of that. I didn't put this in for a vapor barrier. I put this in for air sealing. So let me show you how we're going to seal this bottom plate up for moisture. All right, so how we're going to seal out the moisture and provide our true window flashing is with this. This is called DuPont Flex Wrap. And I got this in the large 9-inch version because these are 2x6 window sills. So this stuff is flexible. You can actually stretch it around corners. That's key, because if you start trimming and cutting your corners, well, you've just made a cut and an opening for potential water intrusion. Whereas if you can keep it solid like this, the water cannot penetrate it, and it'll use that tilted window sill that we made to run the water to the vapor barrier on the outside, down to the dirt where it belongs. So I like what DuPont has done here. It has a double backing on the sticky part, so you can leave this part right here with no adhesive, so it doesn't stick as you kind of work what's on the windowsill, or vice versa if you want to start on the vapor barrier first, which I recommend, so you can pull it tight and back up over the wood. But that is not required right now because I've already did that with this flashing tape. So I'm gonna go ahead and start peeling this off, sticking the wood. I've got it to where it's mostly even on both sides. So let's see if we can make this work here. And this is a rubber butyl back tape, much like this tape right here. The stuff is very stretchy, waterproof, just really good stuff. Now we'll just pull this out, keep everything nice and straight and tight. This makes the process very, very easy. Now you don't have to get a 9-inch version and completely cover your seal like I did, but it just makes me feel better about water potentially backing up this direction. All right, so now we can peel this side off. I've never used this before. I'm curious to see how well it stretches around the corner. Wow, that is really, really easy to work with. Really easy. All right, now this stuff is just like the zip tape because it's rubber butyl backed. It really needs some pressure on it as well as a little bit of friction to help it bond and seal really well. So always roll it in. All right, there we have it. Now we have a windowsill that is ready to accept a window. And the beautiful thing about this stuff is I love it. Not a single cut, not a broken corner. Water will easily run out of this and not make contact and rot the wood out. All right, now that I have determined that the window opening is correct, everything is sealed. And by the way, first step of this entire project should be make sure your window fits. Trim out anything before you start going through all this trouble wrapping. But now we're going to run a bead of DAP window. I call this caulk. It comes out just like caulk, but they claim that it's just like silicone. It's got superior flexibility, doesn't crack and dry up like caulk, but it's made specifically for windows. So we're going to run a nice thick bead around 3 sides. We are not going to seal the bottom because, again, it's not a matter of if water ever gets in behind the window, but when. So when that water runs down, we want to make for sure that it has a way to get out. And if we have the bottom of the window sealed in, it's just going to dam up and potentially back up into the house. Now, we'll seal the window from the inside with caulk and with foam for air sealing, but we still want to leave that gap down here to where water can roll out. So 3 sides only. So I would say that's probably a nice thick 1/4 inch bead. We don't have to get perfect here. We're still going to flash and seal the window in from the outside. This is just an extra level of protection. So typically you frame your window out a 1/2 inch larger than the window itself. That gives you a 1/4 inch space up top and 1/4 inch space down bottom. And if you happen to run some carpenter pencils, they're just a little over a 1/4 of an inch. So you can set some up down here on the bottom to space your window up and kind of get everything nice and centered inside the window. So we can come back and actually foam seal and air seal around the window itself. Plus that extra 1/2 inch 1/4 on either side allows you to get your window perfectly level. Now it just so happens I've made mine a little too tight to get a 1/4 inch top and bottom. So I've got some spare Romex cable where I've been doing wiring in the house that's slightly thinner than my pencil. And I'm gonna lay that down there for my window spacer to kind of get it up and get me a nice even gap all the way around. Now this is typically a 2-man job and I highly suggest it, but if y'all been watching this house build, pretty much everything I do by myself. So you'll have to kind of eyeball either side before you fully press your window in. This is a good time to just go ahead and double check that everything is level and plumb. And I kid you not, because I'll make this mistake. This is also a really good time to make sure you have your window the correct orientation. Make sure your locks are on the inside, the screen is on the outside. I could definitely see myself making that mistake. So now that we have the window nice and pressed in, I use these flat-headed roofing nails because they have a very thin flat head to nail this in. And the reason I prefer that personally is so it doesn't stick out, a big head sticks out, and it makes my lap siding and trim and everything else get even further off than it already is. All right, now that our window is fully nailed in and installed, it is time to flash it. Now you can use Tyvek tape, which I have, or you can use zip tape. It just so happens I have a bunch of these rolls left over from working on the house, so I might as well use these. The other thing I really like about this tape is the width. So not only will it stick to the frame of the window, it'll come out a long ways and get good adhesion on the house. Whereas all the Tyvek tape I've been able to find locally is much smaller and you have to do multiple strips of tape. Now, when it comes to installing this stuff, we do just like we did the caulk. 3 sides. This side, that side, then the top, because we want to provide what's called proper shingling. So if you start on this side and stop your seam just up here, you have an exposed seam that could potentially catch water if it got behind the siding. Whereas if you'll do the top as your last seam that goes over this top edge, it creates a shingling effect that'll run water down the tape and not ever allow it to catch on this blunt edge. Now the reason we don't seal the bottom again, if we ever get water behind the window, we want it to run out over that nice house wrap that we have and the stretch tape that's already down there. So there's no point in sealing that in. Now here's the zip tape and that shingling pattern I was talking about. So now when water, if it were to come down the house, it'll run over this. And this is where I'll admit I just made a mistake. So typically what you do is cut your vapor barrier at a 45-degree angle right here before you install your window, and you cut it over here to 45-degree angle. You take that flap out, you put it over your nailing flange so you can roll that flap up and tape it. Then you come back and keep that flap over, so if whatever comes down the house, it'll essentially do exactly what this tape's doing, but that gives you an extra level of protection should water ever somehow get behind this tape. So that is a step I highly recommend. I am too far gone at this point to do that, but I trust this tape 100%. It sticks extremely well to this stuff and will still provide a barrier if water comes down over the tape, hits the top of the window, and goes around. Now we still have to install Z flashing. We're about to do that, and that'll be our final step of the window. But I did want to point out, I'm human, I'm a first-time home builder, and one critical step that really I suggest doing is cutting those 45s. Take this flap, put it over here after you nail the window, and then it comes to the outside. Then you tape all this in. So I'm going to do a little bit more flashing tape just to make me feel a little better, but I do trust that this window right here is going to be sealed in greatly. All right, so now it is time to trim out our window and then ultimately install our flashing. Now there's a couple different ways to install the metal flashing, but James Hardi has a specific way to do it over the trim, not over the window. I know a lot of people are going to question me on that, and I'm going to go with what their installation videos show. Now I'm using a special carbide blade that is made just for cutting cement siding. Now whenever you put your trim up here, you're going to notice there is a gap back here behind it that we need to fill, otherwise your trim winds up just kind of wanting to roll out and not sit flush and level. And what's creating that gap is your window flange, the nail head sticking up, and then all this tape on top of it. So before you know it, you've got a 1/4 inch gap that you're creating here that you've got to fill. So some people drive wooden shims. It's hard to find 1/4 inch material. It just so happens my lap siding is about that same thickness. So I'll just cut a bunch of shims out of that. It doesn't rot and it'll work. Let me show you. Now when I'm going to make quite a few cuts, I tend to put on a respirator. One cut, I kind of hold my breath, but you can't hold your breath through multiple and many cuts, because this cement dust is not good for your lungs. It's something you definitely don't want to breathe in. So if you're going to sit there and make a bunch of repetitious cuts and you don't have a windy day like I had today carrying this stuff away from you, you definitely need to put on a respirator. Now typically whenever I install the Hardi trim, I cut all my corners at a 45, but we're going to try something new this year on this house to where we have it nice and cut flush, top and bottom. And on the top, I'm going to carry the trim out just a couple inches past this. That's a new look that Tiffany kind of wants, and we're going to try that out. Now you'll notice I could not get the 1-inch trim locally. This is just slightly thinner. So I wish it was a little thicker for the way it's going to butt up to the window. This will allow me a nice caulk joint right there, but this is all I could get my hands on for now. Should look fine once this is painted white to match the window. All right, so I've got one of those pieces back there to help shim this out. We'll go ahead and pop a nail right through that. So somebody asked me the other day, whenever they seen me caulking some trim in for the window vent, they said, hey, why are you not wetting your finger or carrying around a damp rag? And they're exactly right. It's something that I used to do, and the other day I just kind of got lazy and didn't do it. But if you'll keep a damp rag, keep the tip of your finger wet, whenever you go to push in and smooth out your caulk strip, it comes right off your finger. If it's damp, it doesn't stick to you as bad, it doesn't pull, and it makes a smoother joint, and cleanup's just easier as well. So carry a damp rag around with you whenever you're smoothing out your caulk joints. So this is called Z flashing right here, and James Hardi requires it above their trim or anywhere lap siding meets trim above a door or window. So I've already measured my top trim piece plus a 1/2 inch because I need a 1/4 inch lip on either side. I'll show you. Let me get this cut. I'm going to show you how they recommend to install it. So when you install this above your trim, water can run off. So you got two options. You can either caulk the end of it right here and kind of make a dam with that, or you can snip and cut out exactly how I'm doing right there. Fold this piece up and kind of build and make your own metal dam right there. So that's what I'm attempting to try right here. So as you can see, there is our piece of Hardi trim, and they recommend putting the flashing over that itself. I know a lot of people flash over a window, but what James Hardi says that we need to do right here is flash over this. As you can see, I made the little lips for the dam right there. I'm going to put some silicone in the corners so the water can't run out. And then whenever I put my lap siding up here, I'm supposed to space it up 1/4 inch above and leave a gap there. And they say that's for free drainage, so if anything comes behind the lap siding, it comes out. They don't want nothing sitting on top of this trim, supposedly, and they want a 1/4 inch gap because they say lap siding can actually wick up moisture, and that's supposed to provide some kind of air and drying. So I know this is going to be odd to some people, but I have watched several of their installation videos. This is how they recommend trimming out doors and windows right here, and it's more for the lap siding than anything else. Now, I don't feel as bad now about not cutting the vapor barrier at those 45s earlier and lapping over, because I have to do that right now. So what you're going to see me do from the ground down there, I can't hold the camera and do it at the same time. I'm actually going to cut through this tape and vapor barrier, but I'm going to do it a little bit lower, say right here, and then I'm going to pull that flap up and over this flashing. So if water was to ever get behind this, and I seriously doubt that it ever does, it would actually run down the vapor barrier, wouldn't try to go behind this flashing. It would already be, this vapor barrier would be over it, so it'll come here, roll off of that, and then run down the window and lap siding onto the ground. So let me cut this and actually pull it over this, and then we're going to tape it in. Okay, so now what I have done, I cut that flap all the way through that I showed you, and I pulled it back up and over this, and ran another piece of tape and actually taped the vapor barrier to the metal that runs on up to here. So now if anything ever comes down, it's going to go right out. Nothing's going to sit on top of this flat piece of trim and potentially work its way back in. And even if it does, don't forget, we have vapor barrier behind that, we have flashing tape behind that, and everything is designed to kind of run down and outside away from the window. All right, now something else that we have to do is mark out all the stud locations on this wall. James Hardi requires that no less than 66% of your nails putting in each piece of lap siding land on a stud. So they give you up to 33% freedom to miss a stud and to hit your sheathing on the side. In my case would be OSB. Now the other requirement they have is the start of your board and where the board ends must also land on the stud. So you have to keep that in mind. You're gonna have to cut these this lap siding to match up with that, and then stagger your run. So luckily for me, I can go inside because the walls are still open. I've measured. I know that if I pull from the outside edge of this sheathing, that I've did 16-inch on center all the way down this house. So I'll run down with this 50-foot tape, mark all those studs, and then we can transfer the lines with the level, start getting to work. So another option would be to make these same marks up top, which would take a while, moving a ladder, and then you could snap a chalk line from the top to the bottom mark. But no matter what way I do this, it's going to take a little bit. But I like the level idea because now as I move up, I can just quickly slap me some lines up and go on about my business. All right, so what I have done is determined my overlap at the bottom. So not only do I have my vapor barrier hanging down past the OSB that's behind here, so the water doesn't roll off onto the OSB should any actually get behind the lap siding, but I want to overhang my lap siding as well, and also my trim. I've determined 1.5 inches past the OSB bottom should be sufficient for what I'm looking for. Now I just need to start me a piece of trim here and on the other end, so then I can start laying my lap siding in between. Technically I should have my soffits up so I know exactly where to put this. I'll just have to cut the top of this trim later once I start installing my soffits, because they're going to be a very odd design for this style house. So what I usually do is take a scrap piece of trim, stick on this wall, and this helps me determine where to butt these two together so they're nice and flush. So I'll just continue to move this one until it's nice and flush with this piece that's on the wall, then I'll start nailing it in. I forgot to mention I'm using 16 gauge galvanized brad nails to put this stuff in. Alright, so I am ready to install this first painted piece. Again, it's critical to paint several inches up the backside because eventually moisture will find a way back there, and you don't want to wick into this or cause this to deteriorate early. So I painted this yesterday or the day before on the backside, let it dry. Just the bottom runs. You don't have to prime the backside on everything else going up. Now, here's where I'm going to do installation a little different than the way most people do. And I've been doing this for a few years, and I've seen nothing wrong with doing it this way. So because you are installing lap siding, that means your first piece is there, your second piece actually kicks out because it only sits on the top of the first piece that you installed. That's why lap siding always looks like it does, you know, this design right there, because it's kicking out every time you add one on. So typically what most people do is do a starter strip right here that will actually cause the first piece to kick out. I do not. I put my first piece on flat, and then once you stick your next piece over 1.25 inches down on the top, it causes the second piece to kick out. A lot of people think that looks bad. I've done several installs like that, including one I'm going to show you right back here. You can't hardly notice the difference. There's no point in going through all the trouble ripping those starter strips. Personally, the way I feel about it, this is spaced off the house just enough as is. So if we come over here and take a look at this shed that I just built, it has the same Hardy board siding, same paint color, everything, except we are going to do wider trim. So this is that kick out that you can see. Every piece sits just on top of the previous piece and kicks out. I did not do a kick out on the very bottom piece, and I tell you what, you can't tell any difference at all. The only place that you can tell, and your eye has to really be looking for it, is right down here on the very edges. You can see this bottom piece is flat, whereas the next one's starting to kick out. But out here from a distance, you can't tell at all. I think it looks perfectly fine as is. All right, so I dropped a piece of wood on the ground on the other end and have the board supported on that. What's critical about your first piece is you get it perfectly level, because it sets the tone for every piece that you space off of this. So take your time with this, get your distance from the ground correct, and again, make sure this piece is perfectly level. I'll check it. Then periodically, every 3 to 4 runs, I'll check for level again. But that first one is where you need to get it right. So now all I do is go along in the top inch and nail into all the studs that I have marked out now. And I've made for sure that I've ended this one on a stud right here, so whenever I nail in the other one, I can kind of get in that stud as well, because Hardi does require that. Now I'm using hot dip galvanized ring shake nails. You want to use galvanized at a minimum for this material, because cement board or cement material will actually damage nails. So make for sure it's galvanized in an exterior rated nail. All right, well, I think it's time to call it a day. I'm blistering hot out here in the sun. It has been baking. So all the prep work is done. There's a thing about doing Hardi board like this. It's just like painting. All the time is tied up in the prep work. Once you get that done, you kind of fly through the process. So what I mean by that is all the trimming out, going along, marking every single stud, trimming out boxes like this, putting in the flashing there. I did all that off camera. Make sure your first run is painted, primed, ready to go, perfectly level. And then of course installing things like windows. That all takes time. Now next episode, we're gonna come out here and we're gonna fly through this, because we have special hangers that I'm going to show you that hangs on this board now that we know that the bottom run is level, and we'll just start slapping siding on, making a few cuts every so often and nailing it. It will go really, really quick. So the goal is on the next episode to get up about 10 to 11 feet. I had to stop just short of the soffit, which is not installed by the way, and then paint these sections right here, because the true ultimate goal is to get the electrical boxes on the outside here, so I can call for that rough-in inspection that I want to so desperately get past, so we can start doing the installation on the inside. Then I'll jump back out here and keep knocking windows inside and out. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. I learned a lot today myself. Take all this with a grain of salt. I'm just a homeowner trying to build his house. I already had a couple little mistakes, but it looks like they were corrected and okay, like for the window, for example. Since we did the flashing above, no doubt in my mind, no water is getting behind that. I feel very confident with it. But hey, you live and you learn. Now we know what better to do on the next window and as we continue to work around the house. Catch you on the next episode.